100,000, that's the number. Not of cars, not of dollars, but of jobs. Jobs that could disappear from one of Europe's most important industries. And that's only the beginning, because this isn't really a story about Volkswagen. It's the story of what happens when an industrial superpower wakes up and realizes the future has already been built somewhere else. For decades, Germany represented automotive perfection. Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Porsche. These weren't just car companies. They were symbols of engineering itself. For generations, the world believed that if anyone would dominate the future of transportation, it would be Germany. But while Europe was refining yesterday's technology, China was quietly building tomorrow's. Today, one Chinese company sells more electric vehicles than anyone else on Earth. Not Tesla, not Volkswagen. Everyone. And according to reports, that same company could soon be interested in taking over parts of a factory that once symbolized the very best of German engineering. Whether that specific deal happens or not almost doesn't matter anymore, because the rumor itself reveals something much bigger. The balance of industrial power is changing, and it may already be too late to stop it. This is the story of how one of the world's greatest manufacturing nations lost its lead, and how a battery company from Shenzhen rewrote the rules of the global auto industry, the empire that stopped moving. For most of the last 100 years, German engineering wasn't a slogan. It was a fact people built their purchasing decisions around. Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Porsche. 4 names that together employed millions of people and exported one of the few things Germany was universally trusted to do better than anyone else on Earth: build a machine that lasts. Volkswagen alone still employs roughly 657,000 people worldwide, more people than live in most national capitals. But somewhere in the last 15 years, the ground underneath that reputation started to shift, quietly at first. The kind of shift you only notice when you look at the numbers, not the headlines. Today, Volkswagen is reportedly planning to cut up to 100,000 jobs in the years ahead. That figure comes from internal reporting, not an official company statement. Volkswagen's public line is a smaller number, around 50,000, mostly inside Germany. But smaller is doing a lot of work in that sentence. 50,000 jobs is still one of the largest workforce reductions in the company's 89-year history. Rewind to late 2024 for a second, because this is where the story really starts. Volkswagen and Germany's most powerful industrial union sit down at the table and negotiate for 70 straight hours. No breaks. What comes out of that room? 35,000 jobs gone by 2030. In exchange, the company makes a promise that gets repeated in every press release that follows. No plant closures. Hold on to that line. You're going to need it in about 5 minutes. Within months, the German workforce shrinks by another 19,000 people. 28,000 employees sign agreements to leave the company by 2030, voluntarily on paper, but the writing is on the wall either way. And in mid-2026, the CEO walks into a shareholder meeting and unveils something called a future plan, more than 6 billion euros in savings every single year going forward. On paper, that's a turnaround story, a company tightening its belt, getting leaner, getting ready for the next decade. Except that's not actually what's happening behind closed doors. The promise that didn't survive contact with reality. Remember the promise? No plant closures. According to multiple recent reports, Volkswagen's own board is now weighing the closure of several plants inside Germany, facilities that together account for roughly 40,000 jobs and nearly 750,000 vehicles of annual production capacity. For context, that's more cars per year than entire countries manufacture. There's even a name for the internal plan, and it sounds like it was lifted from a corporate strategy game. Group Target Picture 2030. The factories on the list will keep running for now, finishing out their current model cycles. After that, mostly after 2030, the lights go off. This is the part worth sitting with for a second. Factories that German workers, German politicians, and German unions treated as essentially permanent, too important, too symbolic, too central to the national economy to ever actually close, are now sitting on a list that gets discussed in boardrooms, not announced in public. And here's where the story stops being a German story. Because while Volkswagen's own executives are still arguing internally about which factories to shut down, a company on the other side of the planet is already thinking several moves ahead about what to do with the space once it's empty. The twist nobody saw coming. If you assumed this was just a domestic labor story, a country trimming its own workforce, that assumption is about to break. Multiple business outlets, independently, are reporting the same thing. BYD, currently the largest electric vehicle manufacturer on the planet, has reportedly opened talks with Volkswagen about taking over part of one of its former flagship factories. Not a random plant, one that, for years, symbolized the absolute peak of precision manufacturing, a factory whose vehicle production had already wound down. The reported plan: half the space for BYD's own European production, half converted into an innovation center. Volkswagen's response was immediate, and it wasn't subtle. We firmly reject this speculation. A flat denial. Maybe that's the end of it. Maybe it isn't. But here's the thing worth noticing regardless of how this specific deal plays out. The fact that this rumor was even plausible enough to report, plausible enough for serious financial journalists to chase down, and for Volkswagen to feel the need to publicly deny. That tells you almost everything about where the balance of power has actually moved. And BYD isn't alone in circling. Other Chinese automakers, including XPeng and MG, are reportedly eyeing spare manufacturing capacity across Europe as well. This is the actual twist buried in this story, and it's bigger than any single factory. It's no longer just that Western car makers are losing market share to Chinese competitors. It's that Chinese companies are starting to acquire the physical infrastructure that Western companies are abandoning. One side is shutting doors, the other is already standing in the doorway. To understand how a 30-year-old Chinese company ended up in a position to make that move, you have to go back to where BYD actually came from, and it's not where you'd expect. The man who drank battery acid, 1995, Shenzhen in southern China. At the time, still mostly known for cheap manufacturing, not innovation. A 29-year-old chemist named Wang Chuanfu starts a small company with his cousin. Not a car company, not even close. A factory making rechargeable batteries for mobile phones. Wang grew up poor, in rural Anhui province, the kind of background that doesn't usually end with a Forbes profile. He trained as a chemist, then specialized in battery technology, and he had one trait that, according to people who worked with him early on, set him apart from almost every other founder in the room: an almost irrational confidence in his own product. Confident enough that, according to a story that's been repeated in business press for years, he once drank battery fluid in front of skeptical investors, just to prove it wouldn't kill anyone. He called the company BYD. Officially, it stands for Build Your Dreams. Unofficially, it sounds almost naive for a battery parts manufacturer in the 1990s. It doesn't sound naive anymore. In 2003, Wang makes the move that turns BYD from a battery supplier into something else entirely. He acquires a small, struggling Chinese automaker. Overnight, BYD becomes a car company that owns something almost no other car company on Earth controls outright: the battery. The single most expensive, most important component of any electric vehicle, designed and built in-house, with zero dependence on outside suppliers. By 2024, BYD is selling 4.3 million vehicles a year, with revenue up 41%. By 2025, the company sells 2.26 million fully electric vehicles worldwide, more than Tesla, which lands at roughly 1.64 to 1.66 million that same year. Add hybrids into the mix, and BYD's total climbs past 4.6 million vehicles sold in a single year. Sit with that for a second. A company that was assembling phone batteries by hand 30 years ago now outsells every car company on the planet, including brands with over 100 years of history, brands that German engineers spent entire careers believing were untouchable. And BYD is just the most visible part of a much bigger shift. The West falls a lap behind. In 2025, electric vehicles crossed 25% of the global car market for the first time in history. BYD alone holds roughly 22% of that. the single biggest EV maker on Earth for several quarters running, exporting more than 250,000 vehicles that year to Europe, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. This stopped being a story about one company a while ago. It's a story about where the center of gravity in global manufacturing has physically moved, away from the traditional strongholds in Europe and North America, toward East Asia. So why did this happen here, and why now? 3 reasons, and each one feeds the others. First, battery production, built entirely in-house. No outside supplier to negotiate with, no dependency to manage, lower costs across the board. Second, speed. New EV models reach the market in a fraction of the time Western development cycles typically require. Third, and maybe most underrated, a home market that received years of heavy state support, giving Chinese manufacturers a scale advantage that Western car makers, companies that spent decades perfecting the combustion engine, simply can't replicate. The very expertise that made them dominant for a century is the reason they're now playing catch-up. The numbers reflect it bluntly. Germany's Automotive Business Climate Index, once a proxy for European industrial confidence itself, sits at -23.8 in early 2026. Forward-looking expectations are worse, -30.7, and the damage doesn't stop with the car makers. It runs straight down the supply chain, and it doesn't respect a single border. The avalanche hits the suppliers, Bosch. Profits down 45%. The response? Up to 25,000 jobs cut in Germany by 2030. And now another blow. Volkswagen is reportedly preparing to end its autonomous driving partnership with Bosch, a project that had already absorbed around 1.5 billion euros in investment. Instead of continuing to develop the technology in-house, VW is expected to buy the software from a new partner, aiming to save nearly 1 billion euros between 2027 and 2031. For suppliers like Bosch, even tomorrow's technologies are no longer guaranteed business. ZF, weighed down by debt from past acquisitions. The response? Up to 14,000 jobs cut in Germany by 2028. Continental, through its newly spun-off division, Aumovio, up to 4,000 jobs cut worldwide by the end of 2026. The mechanics behind this are almost mathematically simple. A combustion engine needs thousands of individual parts. Fuel injectors, multi-speed transmissions, exhaust systems, the entire architecture built around burning fuel. An electric drivetrain needs a fraction of that. And for generations, an entire ecosystem of suppliers built their businesses, their factories, their workforce training around the complexity of the part that's now disappearing. That foundation isn't eroding slowly. It's collapsing in parallel, across hundreds of locations at once. And what's happening inside Germany right now isn't a uniquely German problem. It's the first visible wave of something that can hit any industrial economy that rides an old advantage a few years too long. The number nobody wants to say out loud. Add it all up, and here's where it lands. Between 2019 and 2025, the German auto industry has already shed roughly 100,000 jobs. And here's the detail that should genuinely surprise you. The forecast for what comes next isn't coming from a critic or an outside analyst. It's coming from the industry's own trade association, which projects another 125,000 jobs lost by 2035. Put those together, and you get a number north of 225,000 jobs that could vanish from the German auto sector and its supply chain in a 16-year window. That's not a slow decline. That's how fast an advantage that took a century to build can erode once a competitor moves faster, cheaper, and with more conviction toward the next technology. Some industry analysts go further, projecting another 20,000 to 50,000 job losses in 2026 alone, driven by tariffs, insolvencies, and production quietly shifting overseas. And the people absorbing most of that impact aren't executives. They're suppliers, small and mid-sized manufacturers, and young engineers who trained for years to build expertise in a technology that's actively being phased out from underneath them. So let's put the whole picture back together piece by piece. A company with 657,000 employees internally planning for up to 100,000 of those jobs to disappear. A public promise, no plant closures, that started cracking almost the moment it was made. several factories sitting on an internal list that nobody wants to confirm out loud, and a Chinese company that isn't waiting around for those factories to sit empty before making a move. It's reportedly already at the negotiating table while the ink on the closure plans is still wet. This isn't bad luck landing on one unlucky country. This is the invoice arriving for 3 decades during which almost no Western industrial power believed any of this could actually happen to them. And here's the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. None of this started last year or even last decade. It started in 1995 in a small battery factory in Shenzhen with a man nobody took seriously enough to remember. A man who drank battery fluid in front of investors just to prove he believed in his own idea. Today, that man's company sells more electric vehicles than anyone else alive, and it may, right now, be one signed agreement away from taking over a factory floor that used to represent the absolute peak of Western industrial pride. This isn't the end of the Western auto industry, but it is proof that the future of the car, and a lot of the other industries riding on its coattails, is no longer being decided by default in Wolfsburg, Detroit, or Stuttgart. The real question isn't whether the West can still catch up. It's how many factories, how many jobs, and how much time are left on the clock before somebody else makes that decision for them. And if part of you thinks the most important chapter of this story has already been written, remember the man who was nobody 30 years ago, in a city most people outside China still couldn't find on a map. The next chapter of this story might already be being written right now by someone you've never heard of.